and I'm just going to throw this in. If any one of you people are lawyers, good, high-powered lawyers, let's take it together to the federal courts, and textbooks will have to put in that if they're using the word evolution, we do not know if the mutations are random or not. There are no data that support that the mutations are random.
למען ציון לא אחשה, ולמען ירושלים לא אשקוט.
You are listening to Hebrew Voices with Nehemia Gordon. Thank you for supporting Nehemia's ministry, Makor Hebrew Foundation. Learn more at nehemiaswall.com.
Shalom, this is Nehemia Gordon. I'm back here with Hebrew Voices, and I'm sitting here in Jerusalem with Dr. Gerald Schroeder. He's an Orthodox Jew. He has a PhD from MIT. He's taught at some of the top institutions in Israel, science institutions, Weizmann Institute, Hebrew University. He's seen nuclear explosions, and he's literally like a nuclear physicist. And now he actually teaches at the College of Jewish Studies in the Old City. It was called also Esha Torah. And his first book was called Science and the Big Bang. He's written a bunch of other books that we're going to have links to on the website. The Science of God, The Hidden Face of God, God According to God. But today we're going to really try to focus as much as possible on this topic of God and God in the Big Bang, or Genesis and the Big Bang. And you were telling me just before we started that about a conflict that people have when it comes to faith and science. So tell me about that.
Look, not everyone is. They say different strokes for different folks, but I've met so many people, literally thousands, not ones or tens, but maybe more than thousands, that say they'd like to believe that the Bible has some aspect of real divinity to it as being just a wonderful story, that there's a God. But what about the Bible? Is the Bible from God? And how can it be that Genesis chapter 1 tells us in 6 days, God creates the universe? That's the first sentence. And by the time you get to verse 27, which is only 5.5 or 6 days later, you got humans, Adam. And by verse 31, the chapter's finished. From the creation of the universe up to humanity, you got like 30 sentences and 6 days, because it's broken up into 6-day units. And how can it be 6 days when science says, quite clear, the data gets stronger and stronger, approximately 14 billion years old? How can it be 14 billion years and the Bible says 6 days? So
for many people, that's an obstacle to their faith in the Torah, in the Bible.
It's more it's a firewall.
Okay. And, a lot of the people listening to this program, certainly my tendency is to be a literal 6-day believer in creation. A lot of the people listening are young earth creationists. But you propose a different. You're not a young Earth creationist. Let's put that out there.
Right.
Am I right? Was it 6 24-hour days?
You see, Nehemia got a problem here, and the problem is that
he's a physicist. So the answer is both.
The answer is both. Literally,
is it 6 24-hour days or billions of years? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So tell us how that can be.
Okay. Much of this, I put the numbers in. I was the lucky guy that put the numbers in. Yeah. But I want to make it clear.
And you're saying before you people hadn't done this? People hadn't figured
this is new. This is
your discovery.
I'm the first one to put these numbers to it. But I was led to it by a commentator in about the year 1200 called Nachmanides with an N. Nachmanides. And then the earlier statements, there were earlier ones by Rav Tanchuma 1,800 years ago. I mean, I only use ancient biblical commentary when it comes to the science, modern science. But as far as understanding the Bible, no modern biblical commentary, because all modern commentators are always bending the Bible to match the science.
So you're saying these traditional Jewish commentaries, they led you to this idea that the world is both billions of years old and 6 days old, or around 6,000 years old at the same time?
They made it.
Or the creation was 6 days.
Okay, let's look. It'd be useful if the person's listening can quickly pull out a copy of Genesis chapter 1. If you don't have a Bible,
you must do that. That's stop what you're doing on the treadmill. Stop what you're doing on your bicycle, and go pull out Genesis chapter 1 and read it. That's your homework.
Yeah. Okay.
Go on.
Okay, and you can get it on your iPhone or however you want to do it. So first of all, we see Genesis chapter 1 is broken into 6 days. God creates, the first sentence, God creates the heavens and the earth. Watch out for English translations. We'll do that maybe at another time. I don't want to get off the track.
So you're saying there's stuff in the Hebrew that's lost in the English.
It doesn't even match the English at all. Okay. But
so that's the first problem. Okay.
I look back in time and I see, from my perspective here on Earth, 14 billion years worth of history. And those years went by. But how would they be perceived? And here is the key operational word.
Everybody listen, here's the key.
How would they be perceived?
Yeah.
From the Bible's perspective of the beginning looking forward. I have to run all that information, and it's totally a thought experiment, back in time to the beginning of the biblical clock, which we know is on day number 1, because that's why it says day 1. Remember, that was the whole point of day 1 versus the first day. When I run anything back in time, as we saw from the galaxy experiment, time is compressed to a different perspective. And that's why the change in the calendar starts with Adam forward. Once you get a year's talking again, in chapter 5 is the first time the time is mentioned after the 6 days and then the Sabbath. Adam and Eve live 130 years, have a kid named Seth. Seth lives 105 years, a kid named Enosh. It's chapter 5. Where'd they live? In outer space? They lived on Earth. From Adam forward, it's Earth time. But what about the 6 days?
This is the key. You're saying those first 6 days aren't Earth time?
From the Bible's perspective, it's the Bible time. The mistake I make in Genesis, the Big Bang, and in Science of God, I say, from God's perspective, we don't know God's perspective. We know the Bible's perspective. God gives us information in the Bible. I've got a good feeling that God's knowledge exceeds the Bible. But that's what we get.
But from the Bible's perspective, it was 6 days. But if you were out in space...
24-hour days.
But if you were out in space, it was 14 billion years or something like that.
But in reality, as we see it and measure it, it's billions of years. And the dinosaurs appear about 210 or 20 billion, a million years ago. And they disappear 65 million years ago from a force from outer space. Adam, caveman, etc. Now, just because I'm a person, all of this is on my website, by the way. It's in the Science of God.
And your book, The Science of God, Genesis and the Big Bang, will be on the website, nehemiaswall.com. Okay. And what's your website? You said it's on your website.
GeraldSchroeder.com.
GeraldSchroeder.com. We'll have that link on nehemiaswall.com.
And you go, there's one essay called The Age of the Universe in 5 pages, about 20 minutes of reading. It gets right. You hear me blabbing away here now, blah, blah, blah. Here. So now we have a view of time looking for the beginning, looking forward. But we don't know exactly what moment or what the universe is like at its creation. And so brilliantly, it just boggles the imagination. We are told by the commentators that are telling us that it's that view of time, that when matter forms, M-A-T-T-E-R, when matter forms, time grabs a hold. And that's very interesting. The first creation wasn't...
And you're saying that somebody wrote this 800 years ago or 1,000 years ago or something?
Yeah, Nachmanides,
Isn't that related somehow to
energy?
The theory of relativity?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
But I'm just saying...
So that's something Einstein discovered, but it was known, you're saying, or believed that 800 years ago.
I'm just saying, we now know that radiant energy, like light beams or heat coming off a wall or anything, or the beams that carry your telephone, they're outside of time. And they pass by definition at the speed of light they travel. At the speed of light, time doesn't exist. So it's only when stable matter forms. I'm not reading this in. Mishia yesh yetfospos man. When you have yesh, stable matter, time grabs a hold. And that turns out to be, I could pull the text right off the shelf, like for the first 3 minutes, whatever, however you want. That turns out to be the first stable matter that makes the elements of the universe are protons. Hydrogen is 1 proton. Helium is 2 protons.
So from the time there was protons, there was time, is what you're saying.
So I look up...
According to Jewish scholars 1,000 years ago?
Time is going by, but nothing's recording the time because time can go by, but nothing's recording it because there's no stable matter. Only matter gets older. Light waves don't get older. Look, you can't get everything in one sentence, in 15 minutes. So what do I have here? I see the energy level... or temperature is exactly the same, two different words for the same thing, that is required for the protons to form. I know that. No, I don't know. Well, I'm a nuclear physicist. I would know that, but I use my numbers. I guess she takes from what's called the threshold energy of protons. And that's a certain energy level. The easiest way of talking about is temperature, Just a certain temperature is energy. And I know the temperature of space today, not the temperature of the sun. The universe is very cold. It's 3 degrees above absolute zero. In centigrade, it's minus 270. In Fahrenheit, it's minus 450. That's the universe deep in space. That's the black of space. The black of space outside of sun. Not the red sunlight.
That's really cold. All right.
if I take the ratio of the temperature of space today, this minus 450, it's called the famous 3 degrees of absolute zero, or the minus 450. People are thinking Fahrenheit primarily, centigrade. What are people?
At these temperatures, nobody has any idea what you're talking about.
No. If I take that ratio of how cold it is today, versus the temperature at which protons and neutrons form, I have a ratio of how much space is stretched.
Okay.
That ratio, Nehemia, is 900 billion. That is to say, the universe is now 900 billion times larger, stretched out, than when the.
And why is that significant for this discussion?
Well, because
what does that lead us to?
That means when I look back and see 14 billion years, if I want to go back to the Bible's perspective, I have to go back to the time when the universe is 900 billion times smaller. And time and the perception of time was compressed by 900 billion.
So you're saying, so the 14 billion years of the universe would have been perceived as 6 days. Is that 624 hours?
14 billion years of the universe would have been perceived by 14 billion years divided by 900 billion.
Which is 6 days?
5.5 days.
Okay.
No, okay. It's pretty,
tell me,
bloody phenomenal.
It is, but I'm not sure I understand it. So tell me in plain English one more time. You've got, because the universe is 900 billion times bigger than it was to begin with, therefore,
and the from the beginning of the clock, and the biblical perception or perspective of time for those first 6 days is from the beginning looking forward. I can't use my perception of time. My perspective.
Okay, so our perception of time today is that it was 14 billion years, but from the moment the universe was created, it would have been looked at forward as 5.5 or 6 days. 24-hour days.
Yeah, the irony.
And you're saying it's not based on some doctrine or belief, but based on math, right?
Totally.
Okay, which you're not going to explain now because it's way too complicated, I'm sure.
No, it's 5 simple pages. GeraldSchroeder.com, The Age of the Universe. It's an essay there, The Age of the
And there
Universe.
you have the mathematics for those who know math that they can confirm this.
It's a division. 14 billion years divided by 900 billion. The zeros all drop out, and you got 14 years divided by 900.
Okay. Comes out to about 5.5 or 6 days.
No, you want to be. Well, the irony is, the embarrassment is, come to be 5.5 days, because when does the biblical clock begin? When Adam is created.
Oh, which is in the middle of the 6th day.
Which comes out to 5.5 days.
Wow. Okay. So basically,
I want to make it clear.
They
put this book on Amazon's bestseller list.
The Science of God.
It was on the bestseller list for the entire year.
Okay.
In the field of science, I'm not bragging now. I want to make it very clear, but I want to make it clear that this is not just some honky-tonk science Bible-thumping thing. This is reality.
Okay.
In the field of science, it was the largest selling book worldwide for an entire year.
Wow. So basically what you've described
here... Which means Brian Greene, Stephen Hawking, Richard Dawkins, all the famous names, you know, and the little Schroeder with
the Science of God. Okay.
The largest selling science.
And we'll have a link to that on the website, nehemiaswall.com.
I'm not selling books, but I want to make it clear.
I want people to go read your book, because what we're offering them here is the tip of the iceberg, and really to get, and I always tell people, when I try to convince them to buy my book, it's not because I want to sell the book, it's because I want them to get more information. And if I'm going to do a teaching, I sometimes have been known to speak for like 10 hours, but still that's nothing compared to what's in the book. And certainly, this is, for your 4 books, we could sit here for 3 weeks and not get to everything, and we're not going to do that. But I do appreciate you explaining this. This was some really complicated stuff. People, take a deep breath, stop on the treadmill, and go to his website, GeraldSchroeder.com, and read these books and get some more information. There's some videos there as well where, the video. I've never put any videos up. But people video you, and
But I want to make it clear, these books are published this is by Free Press of Simon & Schuster. Okay. It's not a science publishing company. It's a popular, it's reader friendly.
Okay. Excellent. Now, this idea of the perception of time, I'm just going to ask this because, look, I grew up watching Carl Sagan and Cosmos, where he talked about billions.
Which is why I wrote my first book.
Okay. Oh, really?
That's exactly why I wrote my first book.
And what I want to get to is the twins. There's that scene in Cosmos where the one twin is waiting and the other goes at the speed of light and comes back, and the first twin is old. Is that have something to do with what you're describing, or is that completely not related?
It's not related, but I talk about not Carl Sagan, but in Genesis and the Big Bang. Okay. That's one of the because it actually was done. There was an experiment done with clocks, not with people. It happens with people also.
And it wasn't that the twin was an old man. It was a clock and it was milliseconds or something, right?
Yeah, but if you could measure that in human time, it's also the same.
Oh, okay.
The twin comes back a different age.
Right.
But
isn't that the whole thing with the GPS system and they have to constly tweak it?
Absolutely. Look, when I took a mind, we always, going back during the Cold War era, we always had this strategic air command in the air. Mm-hmm. Those clocks had to be, and then they replaced with another. The planes would stay for 2 weeks at a time, being refueled.
Really?
Or a week at a time. Then they would come down. A new plane would go up. Those clocks had to be reset all the time.
Wow. And so basically, what that shows is that there's different perceptions of time within the physical universe. Is that? I mean, that's
absolutely
that's an issue of physics, not theology or doctrine or religion. It's a reality of physics. Yeah.
And every astronomer knows it. They would just say, what else is new? We've been saying that for over 200 years, 150 years.
Right. And one more thing, can we talk about evolution?
Yeah. Okay, and I'm going to
and I just want to back up. You do believe there's 6 24-hour days, but the perception of those days, one perception is 14 billion years, and one perception is 6 days. And there's a whole science of math and nuclear physics.
At the same time.
And they both happen, but they're perceived in different ways. But now let's talk about evolution.
Okay.
So, this is the question for a lot of people that I speak to. They say, I don't care if there were a dinosaur 65 million years ago, but did God take dirt and blow into it the nishmat chaim, the neshama, the spirit of life, and into Adam, into the first man? That's really what it comes down to for a lot of people. Because if he didn't, then none of this matters. It's we don't have a soul.
Okay.
I
think when you learn from the text, but again using ancient commentary, that life developed from the simple to the complex via mutations. The problem with the word evolution is that it includes the idea that the mutations were random. Okay. That is intrinsic in the meaning that is used in American English. And I'm just going to throw this in. If any one of you people are lawyers, good, high-powered lawyers, let's take it together to the federal courts, and textbooks will have to put in that if they're using the word evolution, we do not know if the mutations are random or not. There are no data that support that the mutations are random. The mutations that made some lions stronger and some weaker did happen. The question is, what drove those mutations? And when when people use the word evolution and say that the mutations were random, that is a theological statement. And according to the federal law in the United States, it is forbidden to teach theology. I'm pardon Nehemia getting, but I want to get this.
No, please.
I hope someone hears this because I'll be happy to go with them.
You'll testify before Congress about this?
I'll bring in the science understanding of it, because that's what the other lawyers didn't have back in Pennsylvania about 20 years ago. Okay. That the word evolution, as used in American science, is that random mutations make changes, and then some lions are strong, some weak, some cheetahs fast, some cheetahs slow. But the key is on the random. The word random in random mutations is a theological statement. It says that God is not active. It's a negative theological statement. That's as strong as saying God is active. That is forbidden in science classrooms and in the United States of America. And it should be in every textbook that if they're going to use the word evolution, they have to put a sticker in there or make it clear in the text that we do not know if the mutations were random or designed.
So that's what you're basically saying. You believe there's some sort of development of species, but the mutations that bring about that development is divine intervention. Is that what you're saying?
My feeling is that you can't explain it mathematically by random reactions, and most scientists, even biologists, say you can't, but it did happen, it must be random. I think we can take this to the Supreme Court and actually win the case where you have to say so that we don't know the range. My understanding is life developed from the simple to the complex. I have no question about that. That's why I have the 6 days of Genesis flowing through you. You don't start out with people. You start out with life in the waters, which happens to be correct.
So this was a guided development rather than random evolution.
I think it's a mixture.
Okay.
If I see how God runs the world, like the flood example.
There are some things that are random. But overall, there's a guiding hand of God.
God has a goal. There may be meandering. One of my students, it was such a good insight. God is always present. God lets the system run itself. And when it passes a certain threshold of being beyond what God wants, God pushes it back. The flood is an example. Yeah. God pushes it back online. It meanders some more. God pushes it back online. So it's a mixture.
That's interesting. So there's a great example in archaeology, which is my background, So there's Hezekiah's tunnel, which is one of the most amazing things in Jerusalem. People who come here should go to the city of David, go to Hezekiah's tunnel. It's this S-shaped tunnel that they dug during the Assyrian, or in preparation for the Assyrian invasion, to put the water into the city. And what they did is they came from two different directions, and the difference in height from the two directions is like millimeters, or it's like almost nothing. And nobody to this day knows how they did it, because they had no survey equipment. It was underground. They're digging in the dark with, oil lamps, and they somehow met in the middle. And we have an ancient Paleo-Hebrew inscription that describes how they met in the middle. But how they got to that point, nobody knows. And what's interesting, though, is that as you go through the tunnel, there are what are called false starts, where they started digging down at this direction, and then they realized, no, it's not that way. And they corrected. And somehow they ended up with a perfect S where they met in the middle. Wow. And that reminds me of what you're saying here, that God is there. I believe that was the hand of God, because actually in the book of Isaiah, he tells them, don't surrender to the Assyrians. Okay, we're not going to surrender to the Assyrians. What do? We better make preparations. Yeah. And they dug that tunnel, and they built the broad wall and different things. That's pretty cool. So you're saying that in science, you believe there's a similar thing where there's a certain amount of randomness, but then it's the guiding hand of God that's guiding evolution, or what you call development along. Is that right? Yeah,
because development is a neutral term. Develops a neutral, and I think life did develop from the simple to the complex, and that there was a flow. And I take now, not my opinion, but now from Maimonides and the Guide for the Perplexed, 1190, before people are digging up the fossils, and the Talmud 1,800 years ago, in the year 200 and 300, when it's written down in three stages, the year 200 and 400, talks about beings that had the same...
The Talmud says this, or Maimonides says it?
No, Maimonides brings it from the Talmud. He doesn't invent it.
Okay, that they were beings?
They were beings, I'm using the word beings, that had the same shape and the same intelligence as humans. Get this straight. The same shape and the same intelligence as humans, but they lacked the neshama. If you look at Genesis chapter 1, the word creation appears only 3 times. The first sentence of the Bible, God creates the heavens and the earth. Okay? That gets the system going. Life appears on day 3. The word creation does not appear. On day 5, animal life appears also. On day 5, in verse 20, it says God creates in a bunch of animals. You forget what the animals are. Most of the translations are wrong. But the word creation appears, bria. It's different from making and forming. Only
there's
God.
Yetzirah and there's bara. It's two different ones.
Only God does creation.
So what's the third one?
And the third one is verse 27. God creates the Adam. Thank you, Peggy Katz of Hawaii. God doesn't create Adam. God creates the Adam. The English misses it totally. In verse 26.
And what's the significance of that?
Well, because God, in verse 26, God says, let's make Adam.
Okay.
But in verse 27, God creates the Adam.
Which is?
The neshama. All of ancient commentary says there was only one physical creation. I want to make that clear. All of ancient commentary says there was one physical creation. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. So what about Genesis chapter 1, verse 21, where God creates the animals? It can't be a physical creation, Nehemia, so if it's not physical, it must be
metaphysical.
It must be metaphysical.
He whispered the answer. Okay. I think they heard that too.
Must be metaphysical. Metaphysical, the nephesh, the soul of animal life. It gives them a level of choice.
Okay.
Different from plants.
So he created some kind of sentient being, a dog that knew it was a dog or whatever it was, or a slug or whatever coming out. But it had some kind of consciousness, is what you're saying.
Yeah, a choice.
And then for Adam, which you're saying the Adam, then he created for him a neshama. And what is neshama for those who don't know Hebrew?
Neshama would be the soul of humanity.
Okay.
I think the neshama knows what Jesus said was the most important sentence in the world.
He's an Orthodox Jew quoting Jesus.
What?
Everybody slow down. An Orthodox Jew quoting Jesus.
Because Jesus is quoting an Orthodox Jew.
Oh, okay.
Namely Jesus himself.
Okay.
And
all right.
Because the central statement, as my wife Barbara Sofer, a great writer, says, it's the Jewish Pledge of Allegiance. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4.
Wow.
When the disciples asked Jesus, it's in Mark and Matthew, it's the most important sentence ever made. Jesus says the following. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one.
And that's the Shema. Shema Yisrael.
Hashem Eloheinu, Hashem, Lord our God, the Lord.
Hashem Echad is, okay.
Lord,
wow.
One. Jesus quotes it, but Jesus was Jewish, so it's not surprising.
Okay.
So that's what the neshama knows. The neshama Genesis
the soul, not just the Jewish soul, the human soul, just to be clear, that every descendant of Adam has. And the 7 billion humans today, you're saying those 7 billion humans, they all have this neshama.
But I want to make it clear that Maimonides talks about these being, the Talmud does also, but Maimonides being more modern and a doctor.
The 12th century,
he doesn't mince the words. These beings were humans. No, they were beings that had the same shape, and the same intelligence as humans, the same high. They weren't Neanderthal. They had high foreheads.
They were Homo sapiens sapiens.
Exactly. And we are, there's a Rabbi Sturman that said it perfectly. We are Homo sapiens sapien monotheistiums. If you want to have, if you want to call that. That would be the neshama. That's the difference.
So that neshama, that soul, gives us the ability to recognize that the Lord is our God and the Lord is one. Yeah. What it says in Deuteronomy, what as you said, what Jesus said in Mark. And what every Jew today, I know certainly in my upbringing, that was what we were always taught. The last words that should be spoken upon your lips before you die is the Shema. And, my father who, the Shema Yisrael, Hear O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. I know my father who passed away a few years back, one of the things my sister who was with him shortly before, she said the Shema with him. And that was for our family a very, very deep and moving thing that this is something that's in the soul and heart of every human being. And
then the soul doesn't die. I have a whole book I'm writing on now about...
So there's another book coming out. What's that going to be called?
And this is based on neurology.
Okay.
The neurologists have discovered the part of the brain that links to our... I'm not getting this at all, but to be clear. That links, is a link from our physical body... to our metaphysical body. These souls are metaphysical. They're not physical. You realize there's only one physical creation, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. If the Bible says explicitly, God created the animal and God created the Adam. That neshama, that soul. Okay. That's what changed.
So you're saying the second and third time the word bara appears, he's creating something metaphysical, not physical.
Absolutely.
And that's the nefesh of the animal and the neshama of the human being.
Yeah, but I didn't say that.
That was said by who?
Nachmanides said.
Maimonides. Okay, 1,000 or 800 years ago. Wow.
So Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, where God takes a lump of dirt. Adam comes from the root of Adamah.
Right.
It's interesting. The animals are made from the Adamah also, but they're not called Adamah.
Okay.
Now, I understand Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, which is the controversial. God takes a lump. I think that sentence has 4 billion years of life's development folded in.
Okay.
Some dirt becomes microbes, more mutations, not random, more mutations develop, and finally you get to a being that looks just like Nehemia.
But he doesn't have a neshama yet until God creates one for him.
Exactly. And then he becomes, and that's what, because the closing lines, the words of chapter 2, verse 7, V'nefach le'ish v'hidam lenefesh chaya. You have to look at the closing lines. Man became a living soul.
So it says here, Vayitzer Hashem Elohim et ha'adam afar min ha'adama vayipach ba'apav nishmat chaim. Yeah. Vayihi ha'adam lenefesh chaya, which means
and vihi adam lenefesh. In the English translation, man became a living being, but the Hebrew vi'adam le is an L sound,
which means
nefesh,
he
became to a living being.
Okay,
became to a living being, and the Lamed, we are told by these ancient commentators, shows a transition from a lesser to a higher.
Okay.
The neshama changed.
And just to be clear, so there was a man who existed, he was alive, and you believe he was born to parents, a mother and father.
No, I don't believe. Maimonides says it. They all say it.
But there's millions of people who don't believe it, who believe that first man that he himself was dirt that came alive. But you're saying he was born to parents, but he didn't have that nefesh chaya yet.
They were animals. They were animals
until God created that and gave it to him.
They didn't look like monkeys. They looked like people. Yeah.
Okay. So there were people who looked like people who didn't have the soul, and the significance of Adam in Genesis 2:7 becoming a human being is that he was given this soul. That's what you're saying.
And we date that by adding up the years, and it comes out to be 5776 is the year at the moment. You should know, in the British Museum, and the Science of God, I have 2 chapters on this. I'll tell you, and I'm going to say now in the strongest meaning of the word, thank God.
Yeah.
Barbara and I were lecturing in England just when the Science of God was going to final editing. We had a afternoon off, no lectures. We were lecturing back to back. We do it together. It's kind of fun, actually.
Yeah.
I went to the British Museum. Yeah. I had no idea what I'm about to say until back then. And thank God I got in the book.
Yeah.
Went to the Mesopotamian wing.
Yeah.
And there was a section in the Mesopotamian called the earliest cities.
Okay.
And it describes on the wall, I'm showing this to Nehemia now, a photograph of the plaque on the wall, which tells you what you're seeing in this entire wing, not a room, a wing.
Oh, the British Museum, yeah.
Science tells us, archaeology, that society changed so dramatically 5,500 years ago that the British Museum, now remember, the British are very active, we're talking about Mesopotamia here, Iran, Iraq of today, changed so dramatically that the British Museum has an entire section that took place, and they date it 5,500 years ago. Wow. Sound familiar?
Yep.
The neshama changed
the
world.
So you're saying there were things that looked like human beings, and they had the DNA maybe of human beings, but what they lacked was this metaphysical entity, which is the neshama, the soul, and that's what Genesis 2:7 is talking about.
And it changed the world. The British Museum talks about before that time there were no cities, there were settlements.
And I know for a lot of people listening, this is very controversial, and a lot of people will say, oh no, that those like for example, there's a lot of young Earth creationists who will say that no, absolutely not. Every time they find Australopithecus afarensis, or they've found other ones recently, that every time they find one of those have no DNA connection, or we're not descended from those. And you're saying there's no problem for us to be descended from them, because the part that makes us human is this soul that was given in Genesis 2:7, the neshama. Okay.
Chapter 1, verse 27, and 2, but chapter 1, verse 27 and 2:7.
Okay.
Because it's a
Genesis 1:27, it's created, and then Genesis 2:7, it's actually blown into his nose.
And it changed the world.
Okay. And I want you to bring one last story, and then we really will end this. And that's what you were telling me about, because you gave this whole elaborate explanation about the perception of days. And we mentioned young Earth creationists, and you were telling me about a young Earth creationist that you met, a man named Zola Levitt, who was a very ardent young Earth creationist, and he read your book, and what happened? And
it was amazing. I'd never apologize.
And you've been on his show. I've actually been on his show as well. He passed away in like 2005 or something.
About a decade
ago. So what happened to Zola Levitt
many times? Zola read the book. And I get this phone call.
Is Genesis and the Big Bang?
Genesis, the first book. That was the only book out at the time.
Okay.
And this man tells me he's the facilitator. He's
the organizer, whatever, the coordinator.
In Israel. I apologize so much for not remembering, because I met him many times. Yeah. And he says, Zola would like to meet with you. And we set up, and he was leaving that night, after he said we set up 2 chairs outside the wall by Jaffa Gate. There's a big
green area.
Yeah, we sat facing each other. They filmed it. And he said, I stayed up all last night reading your book. It changed me. He said, I've always believed that there's a young Earth. I read this and I realize now that completely consistent with the biblical text is a universe that from one perspective is young, and from our perspective and reality is old. That is, there is an ancient. Well,
they're both reality. They're just different perspectives.
Exactly, the biblical perspective, and that's why the Bible starts with Adam. But can
please.
So I was really impressed by the fact that here's a person who's he has I don't know what his viewing audience, but it's a very large audience, and he was willing to say,
"I was wrong." Wow,
that I was wrong.
Yeah,
and
that's pretty rare. That takes I know in the Jewish tradition we have this concept that if you admit you're wrong, that's actually a very brave thing to do, and it's an honorable thing. But I know for a lot of people coming from different perspectives, they can never admit they're wrong because they've got to have all the answers. Yeah. And one of the things I learned many, many years ago is somebody who thinks he has all the answers probably doesn't know too much.
Yeah. Well, just to that point about on this Adam.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that Genesis 2:7 is saying it's the development of life, and then the neshama is put in. That's the lead-up sentence to the middle of the sentence where God puts in. So when you go to the museum, this is what I think is important now, if I say. When you go to the museum, or you read an anthropology textbook, and you see an exhibit, and there's people sitting around the fire, and they're inventing fire 10,000 years ago, and pottery 10,000, and farming 10,000 years ago, and which complicated tools 50,000 years ago. The museum is 100% correct. The anthropology textbook is 100% correct. By their definition of a person. By their definition of a person. Their definition of a person is a being that looks like you and looks like me, has your brains and my brains. The Bible has a slightly different perspective. The Bible says a person is a being that looks like you and looks like me, has your brains and my brains, and has a neshama.
Wow. And you're saying that this isn't something you just cooked up to try to explain away the evidence. Maimonides said this. And the Talmud said this before anybody dug up an Australopithecus and a Homo habilis. Yeah. So that actually, that's very interesting. Yeah. That's a lot to think about. And I'm going to have to read this book, Genesis and the Big Bang. And, I learned something from Larry King. He says he never reads the book before the interview because then, he doesn't discover what's going, he feels there should be discovery during the interview. And so I haven't read your book. I'll admit that. I have seen a lot of your lectures online. I'm going to go read the book because right now, I'll be honest with you, Dr. Schroeder, this is Hebrew Voices and we hear lots of different perspectives and we honor and respect them. I still, deep in my heart, I just believe it's 6 24-hour days.
You're right. It is 6 24-hour days.
I know. and I understand what you're saying. I don't understand what you're saying. I'll be totally honest. I hear what you're saying about the physics, and I know it's beyond my comprehension because I'm not good at math and stuff like that. But to me, what I struggle with really is there was a clump of dirt that God took in his hand. I don't know if it was a literal hand, but he took in his hand and he made that into the man. And you're saying that happened, but with intermediaries and descendants, and I just deep in my heart, I believe that it was that actual man made from the dirt. But this is the beauty of what I'm trying to do, I think, is share Hebrew Voices. You have a different perspective, and you're obviously a lot smarter than me when it comes to physics and nuclear stuff and certainly mathematics. And so I want people to go out there and read these books and hear different perspectives, because a lot of people out there will say, well, it's either young earth creationism, 6 24-hour days, and Satan planted the dinosaur bones to deceive us. It's either that or God doesn't exist. And I'm saying, you know what? There's other possibilities out there. And we should respect people who have different possibilities. Don't say that this is, I've actually read some of the criticisms of what you say. And some people are saying, you're betraying the idea of 6 24-hour days. You know what? He's another Hebrew voice. Here's a man who fought for the state of Israel, who loves Israel, who's dedicated his life to living in this country and building this country. And he's raising a family in this country and loves the Jewish people and the God of Israel. And this isn't some kind of compromise. That's the word they use, compromise. This isn't a compromise. He's a physicist who knows a lot more about physics than we do. And you can agree with him or disagree with him, but have some respect for him. He's not trying to undermine scripture. On the contrary, he spends his days every Sunday and Monday in the Old City. You were telling me you give this lecture and you teach to anybody who will walk in who wants to hear the truth about Scripture and understand it from the perspective of science. And there is a deep-rooted approach in Judaism going back really to the time of Maimonides and maybe a lot before that, of trying to say that you really can't understand the nature of God without understanding science. And I think that's what Dr. Schroeder is doing, and I have a lot of respect for him.
Everyone that's listening, and in Nehemia also, is more than welcome to come to my session.
I'm going to take you up on that invitation.
Dress any way you feel comfortable, and just come and join the group.
Thank you very much. And I'm really honored that you did this interview with me. Dr. Gerald Schroeder will be links in the show notes on the website, nehemiaswall.com. Thank you guys for listening. Shalom.
You have been listening to Hebrew Voices with Nehemia Gordon. Thank you for supporting Nehemia's Makor Hebrew Foundation. Learn more at nehemiaswall.com.